Jan Baalsrud opened a pocketknife in a hidden room in Arctic Norway. His feet had turned black. No doctor, no hospital, no other way to stop it. So he began cutting off his own toes. To understand how a man ends up performing surgery on himself in a stranger's back room, you have to go back 2 months, to a small fishing boat crossing the sea from the Shetland Islands. Jan Baalsrud was 26, an instrument maker from Oslo before the war turned him into a saboteur. When Germany invaded Norway in 1940, he refused to accept the occupation, escaped, and trained in Britain with the Norwegian resistance. In March 1943, he was one of 12 commandos aboard a boat, called the Brattholm, on a mission called Operation Martin. The plan was simple and secret: land near Troms, organize the local underground, and destroy a German air control installation. Everything depended on secrecy, on not being seen, on contacting exactly the right person. They contacted the wrong one. The Brattholm anchored in a narrow inlet, and a small party went ashore to reach a local man they believed was a friend of the resistance. But the name had been confused, the connection was mistaken, and the man they found was frightened rather than friendly. Word traveled fast in a country under occupation, where sheltering saboteurs meant death for an entire family. Within hours, a German gunboat was steaming toward the inlet. The men aboard the Brattholm had a choice, and almost no time to make it. The boat was loaded with 8 tons of explosives and weapons, enough to arm the resistance across the whole region. If the Germans seized it, that arsenal and every name attached to it would fall into enemy hands. So they lit the fuse and destroyed their own boat, the blast tearing across the water as the gunboat closed in. In the chaos that followed, most of the 12 were shot or captured within minutes. Jan Baalsrud went over the side into the freezing sea. He came out of the water onto snow with one boot gone, the sock shredded, half dressed for the Arctic and bleeding. A German officer cornered him almost at once. Baalsrud shot him, killed him, and kept moving. Behind him the pursuers opened fire, and one bullet reportedly took part of a toe. But he did not stop, because stopping meant dying, and he began to climb a snow-covered mountain in broad daylight. Soldiers firing at his back, and one bare foot punching through the crust with every step. He reached the ridge. The shooting fell away behind him. For the first time he was alone, and being alone was the only thing keeping him alive. He had lost everything in an afternoon. His boat, his friends, the mission, half his clothing, and the toe the bullet had taken. What he had left was a body that could still move and a coastline he did not know, filling with soldiers who did. Everything now depended on decisions made cold, wet, and hunted, with no room to be wrong twice. Now consider what a hunted man in that position actually faces. The Germans knew he was loose and wanted him badly, because a survivor could name contacts and expose the network. The coastline was a maze of fjords and islands, every crossing watched, every village a place where a stranger would be noticed instantly. He had no map that mattered, no dry clothes, no food, and feet already beginning to freeze. His single advantage was that everyone assumed a man in his condition could not possibly survive. So the search would eventually slacken. He only had to outlast it. The trouble was that outlasting it meant staying alive in one of the harshest places on Earth, in a body that was quietly failing. He made for the interior, moving mostly by night, swimming and wading the icy sounds between islands, because the bridges and boats belonged to the enemy. Each crossing was a small execution he had to talk himself out of, the cold pressing the breath from his chest, as he pushed through black water in the dark. When he finally staggered up to an isolated house and knocked, he was gambling his life on the loyalty of a stranger. The gamble held. A family took him in, warmed him, fed him, and did not turn him over. It was the first of many such gambles, and nearly all of them held. Ordinary people in tiny coastal settlements, fishermen and farmers with children asleep in the next room, hit a man the Germans were hunting, knowing exactly what discovery would cost them. That cost was not abstract. The occupation punished this kind of help savagely, burning homes and executing whole families who were found aiding the resistance. Everyone who opened a door to Baalsrud understood that arithmetic. They did it anyway, and then they handed him on to the next house, because moving him was the only way to keep both him and themselves alive. A hunted man who stayed too long in one place doomed everyone under that roof. But kindness could not undo the cold. His feet had begun to blacken. And then the weather, which had nearly killed him already, took a different shape and did worse. Out on an exposed plateau, a storm caught him, and an avalanche swept him down the slope, burying him and spinning away whatever sense of direction he had left. He clawed free. The glare off the open snow had gotten into his eyes, and now he went snow-blind, the white world dissolving into burning light and then into nothing at all. Blind, half-frozen, unable to tell up slope from down, he wandered the high country for days on almost nothing. That he came down off that plateau alive is one of the details that makes the whole story sound invented. It is not. By the time he reached help again, gangrene had set into his frostbitten feet. The dead flesh was spreading, and spreading flesh in 1943, in a hidden room with no surgeon, meant the poison would climb his legs and kill him. There was one way to stop it. So, with a pocket knife, Jan Baalsrud began amputating his own toes, cutting away the gangrenous tissue himself to keep the rot from reaching the rest of him. He did it more than once over days, with only a little alcohol to dull it. It is almost impossible to read about and harder to imagine choosing. He chose it because the alternative was certain, and this was merely probable. The surgery bought him his life, and took his mobility with it. Whatever slim chance he'd had of walking out of Norway on his own was gone for good. From this point forward, Jan Baalsrud would not save himself. He would either be carried to safety by other people, or he would die in the snow while they tried. Here the story stops being only about one man's endurance and becomes about other people. Baalsrud could no longer walk. He could barely move. Whatever happened to him now would be done by strangers who had every reason to abandon him, and did not. A network of villagers formed around the broken man, passing him from hand to hand across the frozen landscape. They hid him in a boulder cave on a high plateau, a gap between rocks they grimly nicknamed the Hotel Savoy, and there he lay for weeks while they tried to arrange the last stage of the escape. The plan was to get him east, over the mountains, across the border into neutral Sweden, where the Germans could not follow. But the border was high and far, and Baalsrud could not carry himself a single yard of it. Someone else would have to. In the cave, the days blurred. He could not stand. He could barely tend himself. The men who reached him climbed for hours through the snow, just to bring food and check whether he was still breathing, then climbed back down before the light gave them away. Weeks passed like this. The escape stalled not because anyone gave up, but because the mountains simply would not let a helpless man be moved. The route depended on the Sami, the reindeer, herding people of the far north, whose sledges and knowledge of the mountains offered the only realistic way across. So the villagers hauled Baalsrud out to a rendezvous point on the plateau, wrapped him against the cold, and waited for the herders to come and take him over the top. And then the weather closed in. This is the part of the ordeal that is easiest to underestimate. The dramatic moments were behind him: the firefight, the swim, the knife. What remained was waiting, and waiting nearly finished what bullets and gangrene had not. Storm after storm swept the plateau. The reindeer could not move in it. The rendezvous failed, and failed again. Baalsrud lay buried in a sleeping bag under the snow on open ground for days at a stretch, unable to sit up, unable to see, kept alive only because the drift over him trapped a little warmth. His helpers could not always reach him through the blizzards. At times he lay out there completely alone, drifting toward death, certain no one was coming, and then someone came. Each failed attempt made the next one harder. His strength was almost gone. Every day out in the open raised the odds that a patrol would spot tracks in the snow, or that he would simply stop breathing in the night. The people helping him were exhausted and afraid, and still they went back onto the mountain to dig for a man who might already be dead. Every prediction pointed one way, that this could not possibly end well, and the record keeps refusing to confirm it. At last the weather broke. The Sami came with a reindeer sledge. They lashed the ruined man to it and drove up and over the high border country, through terrain that would have killed a healthy man moving on his own, and down the far side into Sweden, neutral ground, beyond the reach of the occupation. After roughly 2 months, hundreds of miles, an avalanche, snow blindness, self-surgery, and more nights buried in snow than a body should survive, Jan Baalsrud crossed out of German, held Norway alive. He was the only one who did. The 11 other men of Operation Martin were dead, killed in the fighting at the inlet or captured and later executed. Civilians caught up in the betrayal and its aftermath paid as well. Measured by its objective, the mission was a total failure. Nothing was sabotaged, nothing was built. By every military metric, Operation Martin accomplished nothing at all. And yet it produced something the planners never intended: a record of what a single human body and a chain of ordinary, frightened people can endure and refuse. Baalsrud did not survive because he was stronger than the mountain. He survived because one frightened man's betrayal was outweighed, again and again, by families who had far less to gain and everything to lose. He was carried the last and worst part of the way by people who could have let the snow do its quiet work and told no one, and chose the opposite. Jan Baalsrud recovered in Sweden and lived. He lost most of his toes. He came through the rest of the war and into a long peace, and he died in 1958, at 41. He could have been buried anywhere. He asked to be buried in Mandalen, in the north, among the people who had dug him out of the snow and refused to let him die. His grave is there still, in the country that nearly killed him, beside the strangers who did not. He had walked back from the edge of the world on feet. He had cut apart himself. But the thing that actually saved him was never in his own hands at all.